A very good evening to everyone present here tonight. My name is Brian, and I will be your host for tonight. On behalf of the JPO family, we'd like to extend a warm welcome to everyone tuning in for tonight's broadcast. We hope that everyone is doing well and staying safe indoors. A friendly reminder to maintain good hygiene at all times and maintain social distancing when heading out. As we'd like to continue improving your experience with us, please help us achieve this by completing the poll that will be published during this broadcast. To anyone who is interested in sharing tonight's broadcast, a live feed is being shared on the JPO YouTube channel. If you have any questions that you'd like to ask, please feel free to type them out in the Q&A section down below. For those of you joining us from YouTube, please type your questions out in the live chat down below. A recording of the webinar will also be uploaded onto the YouTube channel. Tonight's seminar features Professor Marcello Defant, with his topic being Vivaldi, the Four Seasons, and the Venetian Baroque Style in music and in the arts. As our JPO family attendees are mostly students ranging from primary school to college, their parents and their teachers, the sharing of knowledge and advice here for all of us tonight is invaluable and greatly appreciated. The JPO is very honored to have Mr. Defant join in as our guest for tonight. I hope that you all join me in giving him a warm welcome. Professor Marcello Defant was a pupil of Salvatore Accardo, Franco Mazzena, and Ruggiero Ricci, who praised his playing as being really first class in all respects. He has also studied viola as well as music composition and was granted his doctorate in musicology in 2004 at the University of Bologna. Since his first public performance at the age of 15, he has performed as a soloist and chamber musician in a long and rewarding career, which has taken him across the globe to the United States, South America, parts of Asia including Japan and China, Africa, as well as many countries within Europe such as Portugal, Germany, the Netherlands, France, Spain, Sweden, the United Kingdom, and of course, Italy. He gives regular violin and chamber music masterclasses in many of the aforementioned countries. He also actively teaches at the online music academy, musicu.live. He currently serves as an academic violin professor at the Verona Music Conservatory in Italy. He has collaborated as a concert master with outstanding orchestras such as the Zurcher Sinfonica, the Orchestra Internazionale d'Italia, the Teatro La Fenice in Venice, the Milano Classica, which is a chamber orchestra in Milan, and many others. He has worked alongside renowned conductors such as Leonard Bernstein, Lorin Maazel, Sir Neville Marriner, and Vladimir Delman. He's also often invited on as a jury member in important international competitions, such as the Emil Kamilarov in Sofia, Bulgaria, as well as the Beethoven Wettbewerb in St. Pölten, Austria. He has also recorded for organizations such as the Süddeutscher Rundfunk, the Symposium Phoenix Classics, as well as Virgo labels with a wide repertoire of recorded music, which includes works by Milhaud, Anzoletti, Vivaldi, Schubert, Paganini, and many more. So without further ado, once again, a very good evening, or in this case, a very good afternoon to Professor Marcello Defant. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Hello, it's nice to be here and thank you for inviting me. I'm very glad to have this opportunity and I hope I will be interesting for you.
Well, thanks for joining us tonight. So to start tonight's interview, what can you tell us about the two videos that we were just watching earlier on?
I will tell you something about Summertime, George Gershwin's Summertime, in particular, because it's a little bit aside from our daily topic, that's Vivaldi and the Four Seasons, whereas the other video is much more related. So maybe I can talk about that a little bit later. Well, Summertime is still about seasons anyway, so I'm not too far away from the topic, right? It's a transcription for solo violin, and it was made with a particular purpose in a particular situation, because a friend of mine who organizes concerts asked me some time ago if I could play for the presentation of a book. It was a long novel about a love story between a musician, a violinist, and a school teacher. And I had to read the whole book, of course, first. And there were many places where The novel say that the violinist would pick his instrument and play music for his beloved. But none of these pieces that were mentioned in the book were actually solo violin pieces. And I had to play alone. So because I started my musical training playing the piano, I think I have a tendency of thinking in multiple combined voices. And I didn't want to play just a melody out of a wider musical piece. So I decided that I would focus on a piece where the violin could kind of accompany itself, maybe with some little tricks. And I tried for a long time, but it wasn't so easy. So I waited for the inspiration, and the date came closer and closer. And just the night before, I was in the hotel room, and finally, oh, I got the idea. So the inspiration came, and in a couple of hours, I wrote down the whole piece. It sort of came by itself. And I only had the next day to practice. And it's not a terribly difficult piece, but it's not easy either. So one day practice is very little for a concert. So I had to practice real hard. But I didn't want to give up the piece how it came. I sort of owed respect to my inspiration, and I had to take what it gave me in full. And so it was a very intense experience, but it was very exciting.
I'll bet. Thanks for sharing that with us. So moving on, as you mentioned earlier on, the other song, like the topic for tonight and the song earlier on would be Vivaldi. So Vivaldi, regarding Vivaldi and the Baroque music in Venice. So how do you relate yourself with music that was written 300 years ago?
Yes, it's well, you know, us interpreters, we are kind of sitting on a line that's between the moment when the music was written and the moment when we perform it in front of our audience. And in the first place, we have to decide very well where we want to sit along this line. If we want to stay closer to the original world when the music was written, that is, in the case of Vivaldi, some 300 years ago, or if we want to be closer to the audience that's listening to us. And both ways, I think, are good. They are more than justified. It's just that we have to decide. So if we want, we can translate much of this music into modern sound. And it's still amazingly actual because harmony and some patterns, they have survived almost unchanged. And it's a very, very descriptive music. But we can also decide to take our position closer to the world of the author. And we try to recreate this world. And this idea is what drives the so-called Baroque praxis, for instance. It's musicians that they try to recreate everything as it was written in that particular age.
All right. So I take it, yeah, I take it you mean like they start using like period instruments and such. So yeah,
Yes.
okay. All right. So there's this term called praxis. So there has been a lot of attention going to this and in the past decade. So the attention seems to have shifted towards the composers and after all.
Yes, so it seems, but I think we have to remember that this is the point of view of the interpreters. So interpreters, they seem to very often try to go as near as possible to the composer's world. But how does the audience feel and react? How much do they know? If they're not aware of what's going on, if they're not being told that we're playing on an ancient instrument with and the reason why we do this, they might lose the goal of what we are doing, and this could become a dead end. For example, in the Baroque praxis, it's now normal to use for the string instrument to use gut strings. They're made by goats' guts. They're being they're being treated and worked, of course. They don't smell and they don't feel like like what they are, but that's what they are. Or play string instruments with no chin rest, no vibrato, tuning to a lower A, using non-tempered scale systems. All of this should be always taken with great consciousness on both the performer's side and the listener's side, because everything can be put in discussion. For instance, no vibrato is a must for most Baroque praxis performers. But there are testimonials. Geminiani, who was a great violinist, in 1749, he wrote a treatise on the art of playing the violin. And he clearly wrote that every note should be played with vibrato. So it's the opposite. Or, for instance, the tuning on a lower A. Musicians say that now the A is the note where all instruments tune. I say this for people who maybe don't know much about music. Okay, we have to decide on what level of intonation we want to play, and so we pick one note and we say this is our standard. And nowadays, the standard for the note that's called A, it's 440 or maybe 442 hertz. But most Baroque praxis players, they say the A of the standard tuning A for that era should be around 415. But this is difficult to say because first of all, cities were very far away. So how would you guarantee me that the A that was played in London was the same that was being played in Venice? Because they didn't know what a hertz was. So they had to tune by experience, right? And we have many testimonials that in Venice, the A was very high, probably much higher than it is now. So everything can be put in discussion. And also, it is also true that there was a great freedom for creativity in those times. So musicians could basically do everything they wanted. And then it was the world who would say, this, I like this, or I don't like this. There was no standard, or at least there was much less standard than we want to have now. So this is a little bit superficial, everything of these things. But I would try and go one step forward, because I think what we have to try and understand and possibly get closer to is not what strings they played, what A they used, how they played one trill, or how they, sorry, this is disappearing for me, the screen. Are you still there?
Yep.
Yeah,
yep.
Okay. I was saying, it's not that we have to try and imitate these things, but I think we have to try and go back to how they perceived the whole universe. For instance, there was a totally different purpose in creating an artwork. And musicians, all musicians, they had to be very able to know and use the rules of tonal harmony. In the treatises, it says very clearly, everyone says very clearly, that every player, even the last player in the orchestra, in the very, very last stand back there, he should know very well the rules of harmony. And through this, he could be free and still stick to the music. So it's the basis for correct interpretation and for combining this with total freedom. Yeah, I think this is the core of what we have to look for when we play this music that it's so many centuries away from us.
All right. Well, earlier on you mentioned something about having a different perception of the universe. So could you provide some more elaboration on this? Could you clarify this a bit further?
Yes, because it's very important for me. Now, we talk about Baroque music, but of course, when we try to define an era, it's always somewhat rough, a rough definition. In Western countries, what we call the Baroque era, this word comes from a Spanish word, from barrueco, and barrueco means just an irregular pearl. So it came to define whatever is opposite to linearity and simplicity. And it was used for this, to define Barocco opposite to the classical style, which on the other end is very, very linear and very clear. But of course, it's not enough. It's just a word and it doesn't define a whole century. In Italy, for instance, it was just after the Renaissance era. And this is again a definition which is too wide, but at least what we know about the Renaissance is that it was dominated by a holistic view of the world. What does that mean? It means that phenomena in all fields were thought to be parallel, and they were all generated by the same simple laws of creation. So when an artist was creating, he was just spotlighting in his work the same rules that run the universe. That was the idea. And so art and everything, all the matters, they were all being created by the same rules. And for instance, Johann Sebastian Bach, at the end of his works, he used to write 3 letters. It's SDG. And these 3 letters, they meant Soli Deo Gloria. This means in Latin, just for the glory of God. So this really means that he wanted to reflect in his music the idea of creation, but he didn't want to create something himself. He was like a servant of God's idea of creation in music. But after the end of 18th century, our society shifted totally to a new vision of the world, where the man was free, was able to create anything he wanted, and the science could explain everything. This was an enormous shift in mentality, and we still live in this different world. So when we want to understand truly something that was written before, we must know that it was born in a world that thought this way. And the art was not an act of individual creation, but it was an act of recreation of sacred rules. By the way, also violins were built this way. They were not built to follow mathematical rules, but they were built so that the mathematical rules were a mirror of something of a superior nature.
All right. Thanks for sharing that perception with us. So before we move on forward, I would just like to remind our audience, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask, please feel free to type them out in the Q&A section for those of you on Zoom. And for those of you on YouTube, please type your questions out in the live chat down below. So yeah, so moving back to Vivaldi. So why was it so interesting for you to study his music in particular?
Well, there are many reasons, actually. One is that I live very near Venice. It's only some 40 minutes away, and so it's something topical here. And then another reason is just the simplest possible, that Vivaldi was a great man, a great musician, as opposed to what, for instance, Igor Stravinsky, he didn't have a great esteem of Vivaldi. He wrote once that Vivaldi wrote 400 times the same concerto. Because he probably didn't understand that this writing, this kind of automatic writing, was nested in an era when this was an act of creation, a real act of creation, as I said before. And so Vivaldi had a huge fantasy, and he used simple ways to express his huge fantasy in the most free possible manner. And then the third reason is much more personal, and it is that when I was a young student, I came to have in my hands a violin that came from the collection of instruments of La Pietà in Venice, and that's the church where Vivaldi used to work. So my violin was possibly one of the violins that had been used by the girls that lived in this college and who learned music with Vivaldi. So this was a sort of personal link for me towards his music. And also, yeah, as I said, I live near Venice, and I think it's a great privilege for playing Vivaldi's music to be able to experience the same world where he used to live. For example, some colors in his music can only be understood if you have seen certain sunsets here, where the humidity in the air gives the sky so many shades of yellow, pink, green, purple, that they are like draping the shiny monumental houses of Venice and the sea all around. Okay, you can find these colors in the paintings of Tiepolo, probably the most famous Venetian painter. And why it's so peculiar? Because it's real. It was real. It's the real colors that you can see here.
All right. So I take it that you probably have to like visit Venice once in your lifetime to actually truly appreciate this Vivaldi's music. Is that what you're trying to say as well?
Yes, I think you have anyway, even if you don't want to know about Vivaldi, but I think you have to visit Venice at least once in your lifetime.
All right. Well, so how about the Vivaldi Four Seasons? What makes it so special, or in your opinion?
Well, maybe, as I said before, the structure is very simple. The structure of this music, it's very simple and very direct. And so he could put many things in this music that are almost extra musical. And it was a winning formula. It was an instant success. Can you imagine that just a few years after the four concertos were published, there was in Paris, there was a version of the Four Seasons for two flutes, the complete concertos written, rewritten, arranged for two flutes, and just maybe 15, 20 years later. And then throughout the centuries, they have always been a great success. And they actually, they use a long tradition of translating images into music. There is a long Italian tradition that dates back to the madrigale. It's a medieval song where everything was trying to imitate the other phenomena, like even the notes, how the music was written, even those could suggest a different image. Like if they wrote an ascending scale, this could mean the ascent in paradise. Or if they wrote a melody with many sharps, this could represent Christ's cross, because a sharp looks like a cross. Okay, so this dates very, very way back. And Vivaldi wrote 4 poems. It seems it's almost sure that he wrote those poems himself, and to illustrate the music. So the music could be very, very descriptive. And I think he wrote the words around the music and not the music around the words. So he could use as much fantasy in writing his music as possible. And there are many examples, actually, and some examples are very famous. Like he imitates birds. I think almost everyone knows Vivaldi Four Seasons, right? And in summer, the poems talk about many words. It's like the cuckoo, and or I don't know the word of this other bird in English, but very different species. Like at the beginning, almost the beginning of the concerto, we have. And this is the ooh, 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 ooh. Or we have another bird later on that's. Or we have the famous birds at the beginning of the spring. So he really tries to recreate the sounds of nature here. Then we have listened at the beginning of the last movement of summer. You asked me to tell something about that, and now it's the time. This is the end of the summer, and of the summer concerto. Sorry, I've lost your image again. Are you still there?
Yep, I'm still here. Yep. Hello.
Okay, I don't see you anymore, but as long as you see me, it's okay.
Yep.
So we have listened to the last movement of summer, and this movement depicts a storm, a big storm, with winds, with rain, and it's very famous, right? And then there are less famous and more subtle things in the text and in the music. For instance, at the beginning of spring, the words say that the spring is coming and the birds sing. And then they say the water is flowing in the rivers. And it goes like this. The music goes like... So this this way of playing is like the blur of the water with the light reflecting on top of it. And it's very interesting. There are many of these images in the music. And so these concertos to me are a constant source of inspiration, because you can dig more and more and find more images in the music that you can spotlight when you play. And I played them so many times. I remember once I was in Sonora, Mexico. It says Hermosillo. It was a city in the middle of the desert, but I love that city. And I was urged to fly back home because my second daughter was about to come to light. But the concerts were sold out, and the theater was so full of people that wanted to come to the concerts that the management asked me to add another date. And I thought it over. Oh, what should I do? And I prayed that my daughter could wait another couple of days, and I decided to stay. And my daughter took my prayer maybe even too literally, because she waited another month before being born.
Okay. All right. So yeah, well, that's good then. So yeah, that's definitely very interesting. I definitely wasn't like considering that everything in the music was that literal. So yeah, thanks for sharing that with us. So how about so what is your relationship with the violin, as it seems to be your main instrument?
Yeah, well, it's a magic instrument. Really, you can only, either you don't even consider it or you entirely fall in love with it. And for me, it was love at first sight, and maybe even love at first fight with my parents, because they wanted me to become maybe a doctor or an architect. And I fought for music. And I was actually destined to become a pianist when I was a child, but then I met the violin, and so I switched to the violin. And probably having studied a bit of piano when I was younger made my fortune, because, well, I I can still think of music as the result of combination of two or more voices. And the violin normally just sings one voice. So I think I had a great gift in playing the piano before.
All right. Well, that definitely shows, like as you mentioned earlier on with the summertime song. So yeah. How about for like the future generation of musicians? So what would you recommend to young students taking up the study of violin nowadays?
Well, the most important thing I think is treat the music with respect when you play, whatever kind of music you are playing. Um, every kind of music is nested in the world where it was created. So you should not only know the piece of music you're playing, but you should know as much as possible about the world where it belongs. And this applies to all kinds of music, be it pop, rock, jazz. Every music lives in its own world. And you have a duty towards whoever listens to you to try and bring him back to this world, depict this world to him or to her. And so be very respectful. Don't put yourself before the music you are playing.
All right. Thanks for the advice there, Professor Marcello. So there was a certain picture that you shared with us. I think we should try to get it out on screen first. Yep. Okay. So as we can see over here, you're playing a violin on a sailboat. So why was this picture special to you in particular?
Yes. It's a picture I love because it puts together my two great passions that are, of course, playing the violin and sailing. And I even have a little sailing vessel, and sometimes I have the privilege of sailing directly into Venice. I can arrive right in front of the big San Marco Square, and that's quite an experience. Um, and I think I really believe playing the violin and sailing have very much in common, because when I sail, it's like I feel as if the wind was my bow and the water was my strings, and I'm there just to trying to master the point of contact of these two elements, and this point of contact is constantly changing. And it's the same with the violin, because in case of the violin, you produce sound mixing these two elements, bow and strings. And when you're on a sailing boat, you move along, mixing wind and water. And in both cases, you can only succeed if you are ready to adapt every moment to the reactions of these two elements. And you react at your turn. So I think playing the violin and sailing trains the same kind of instant awareness that is so important for us.
Hmm. All right. Well, thanks for sharing that outline with us. So yeah, it definitely was an interesting outlook between sailing and violin there.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we'll have one more question from the JPO before we move on to the questions from the audience. So as you may have heard, the Jesselton Philharmonic Orchestra, or the JPO, has involved itself in a variety of activities. So on behalf of the JPO, we would like to ask about your views on the JPO and its activities. Additionally, how would you suggest that the JPO and its members further improve itself?
Well, I really think JPO is doing a great job. because from what you told me, it's covering up and connecting different fields, which is so important, because it's working on concerts. So it's projecting itself in a professional world, but it's also working on teaching very much. And so this connects the didactical world. And also with the exams, it's giving the opportunity of a proof, and a proof is like a passport for anyone who wants to project himself in the world outside. So it's a very open way of connection, and I really appreciate this. And if it's difficult to give you a suggestion to do better, but I don't know if you are using the same very wide point of contact with your audience, if you are really cradling your audience as you do with your musicians and students, because audience is what makes musicians great. And so training an audience, even if they're not musicians, or training amateur musicians to come as near as possible to professionals and students, I think it's a wonderful way of connecting the world together, the people of the world. And music is the best way, I think, to connect, because it's a universal language, and it really speaks directly to the soul. It doesn't have to go through words or anything. It goes directly here.
Yeah. Well, thanks for the advice there. I'm sure teacher Alvin will take that into consideration. And many thanks for the compliments as well. I'm sure he's happy to hear all those. I think with that, we'll move on to the Q&A section. So we have a question coming in from in the chat. So we do have one person say, this person's name is Maya Sanchez. Maybe you might know her. She's saying, hi, I've seen that you've taught in many master classes and in the Italian Conservatory. How important is teaching in your musical life?
Well, teaching is very important. And it has become more and more important, I must say, because it keeps me in touch with the difficulties that learning music can give you. I mean, the more you need to teach people, the more questions you need to ask yourself. And this is also a reason why I try and teach as much as possible with master classes. I have this online academy, and I'm really, really very committed to my conservatory job, because I try to pass on everything I know, because as I said before, we must not put ourselves before the music. It's true also in this sense, that we must not be selfish with the things we learn, but we must pass them on to as many students and as many possible heirs as we can.
Thanks for that. I'm sure Maya is happy with the answer there. Moving on. So we have a few more questions coming in. So, hello, Professor. So, what's your personal opinion with using period instruments as opposed to contemporary instruments to play Baroque music?
Okay, I have spoken a little bit about this, right? And period instruments can be a wonderful way of letting people understand what was the sound of the age, what many details that get lost or get changed, not lost, but changed with the modern instruments, can be restituted to life. But I think more and more, the further we come from the era when the composers were born and worked, the more we need to explain these things. So I think it goes more into relationships with the audience, where you have to tell them, I'm using this Baroque violin and the sound will be different in this and this, and for this and this reason. And then you are able to let them understand every effort you make, because we must say it's a great effort. I mean, there is an evolution. We have now we have strings that play by themselves, stay in tune. You can treat them with the bow as you want. They're much easier than they used to be. So if we want to give up this evolution, we want that people who listen to us understand that we are making an effort, and we're making it for them. So we need to tell them.
All right. Well, I take it that you're definitely a fond, like you're definitely a how to say, like a supporter of using these, because I think I read on your profile somewhere that you have two very old instruments, like both a violin and a viola, back from the 1700s. So yeah, that's interesting. So
Yeah,
do you,
I have two very good ancient instruments, a violin and a viola. But I must say that at the moment I'm playing a modern instrument, and there are modern instruments that have nothing to envy to very expensive 18th century instruments like Stradivari or Guarneri. I think nowadays we can find something that gets very close for a much more affordable price. We only have to choose well.
fair enough. But do you use these particular instruments for any of your performances, like for those that require period instruments in particular?
I have one violin that is apt for these performances. I have gut strings on that violin, and also something in the architecture has changed throughout the centuries. So it is built as it was originally, and I use that. It's not my main instrument, because I must say I play music of all ages. So 18th century is just one century, but then there's 19th, 20th, and now even 21st. So I need a main violin for all this repertoire, and then one that's used for the 18th century repertoire.
Fair enough. Well, thanks for sharing all this with us. So we have another question from the same person. So which do you prefer if both are of similar standard? Would you perform according to what most audience perceive, or would you perform to what most audience expect?
Sorry, I missed the first part of the question.
So which do you prefer if both are of the similar standard? So would you perform according to what most audience perceive, or would you perform it to what they expect?
I try to get in touch with the audience. So definitely I would try and perform according to what the audience perceives, not to what they expect. And I try, it's like I try to convince them that I'm doing a good job.
I mean, I guess it's more like what you said earlier on. Like it's more putting the music ahead of yourself. So you're just trying to relay the music to them, I suppose. So yeah, that's definitely understandable there. Moving on. So we have another question from someone else. So they're saying, "Hello, having amazing teachers and the environment you were brought up in. Do you think that helps you in your musical journey?"
Absolutely, yes. I owe everything to my teachers, because they opened my eyes. We, of course, we do the job. I mean, as students, we remain closed in our room, and our friends, they go out, they play soccer, and we stay in our little room and we play scales. And so we lead a different and difficult life. But we need someone to lead us there, and to tell us we're doing well, we're doing wrong, and open our eyes and build up our view of the world. And this, particularly in music, where the relationship between teacher and student is one-to-one, this is very important. So I think every musician owes very much to his teacher or teachers.
Definitely can agree on that. So the person also has another question for us. How do you feel? Have you ever felt like you were so engrossed into what you have known that sometimes that this becomes an obstacle for you to learn new things like styles and techniques?
Yes, yeah, I think this is a great danger. Sometimes I get this feeling, and I try to approach from a different angle, and this sometimes works. I once read that Paganini was a very good violinist, enormously gifted, but he only shifted to being a genius when he studied guitar for a couple of years, because then he could pour into his violin playing all the experience that he made on the guitar. So I think whenever you have the feeling that what you know becomes an obstacle to going further, you should just change completely way and try and go from the other side of the obstacle.
All right. Well, thanks for that. So moving on, we should still have, we should still have enough time for a few more questions. So we have another person saying, Ciao. What would you recommend a musician who would like to learn more about different styles and interpretations of music? Yeah, that definitely would be interesting to know.
Yeah, be curious. It's all that I can say, because be curious and read a lot, listen to many people, listen to what they say, and try when somebody says something that's convincing, try and listen to something that says the opposite. So always have a doubt about what you are learning. So this will keep your mind open, and you will learn much more, I think.
So basically widen your perspectives on that. So yeah, can agree with that. I think this would be the last question we have from the audience. So this person is just saying, just for a laugh, do you say? Oh, okay. Do you sail solo or with others, as in chamber music? Sorry.
I do both, and I love both. I love playing solo, and I love playing chamber music. And it's the same thing with sailing. I love sailing solo because I'm more concentrated on perceiving this relationship between wind and sea, as I said. I feel like the note that's coming out of the contact from the bow and the string, and my boat is coming out from the contact between wind and water. But then when I sail with other people, it's the collaboration that's wonderful, because we all have to adapt together to what's happening, and each one has to do his own job. And in chamber music, it's the same thing, because the music is going on, and in the ideal chamber music group, not everything is granted. Somebody, you play together, you play in a quartet, and someone has an idea, and suddenly he plays a little bit slower at the end of a phrase, and you must be ready to pick up this suggestion and make something entirely new yourself that's connected with that. So it's an act of creation of more people together. And both things are absolutely wonderful. So I wouldn't privilege one on the other.
All right. Let's see. Yep, I think we're receiving a few more questions. I'll take a look at that one soon. In the meantime, so how about playing the instruments on the deck though? Because I think I can speak from experience that the ship can get a bit rocky, and like I think sea conditions might be a bit. Wouldn't they affect the instruments in some way as well?
Yes, you don't do it when it's rocky.
That's understandable.
you're much more concentrated on what's going on and on staying afloat.
Okay. Oh yeah. So yeah, I think someone like they even pointed something out. How about the humidity there? Yeah.
Yeah, that's another item. I never bring my good violin on a boat, and the longer the trip is, the worse the violin is. So I have a selection of very cheap violins that go from bad to worse to absolutely worst, and I pick them according to what my trip is going to be.
All
But I
right.
had a couple of opportunities when I gave little concerts on a boat, and in that case, of course, you bring the good violin with you, but you just you come on top of the boat, and playing is your main aim. So it's not really like connecting the two things. You are doing a job there.
Fair enough. All right. So yeah, we should still have time for one more question. We have a question coming in from the Q&A on Zoom. So this is coming from Simone Rodriguez.
Mhm.
So yeah, so they're asking. So do you think that to respect a type of music, it's better to change your personal lifestyle? Like as you said, like you currently live near Venice, like to be closer to the whole, like to Vivaldi and such. So do you think this is necessary? And could you give us further examples on good behavior to respect classical music in similar ways?
It's difficult to say because you have to be yourself. So I don't think trying to change one's life is the right way, the right approach. I think it's a good approach to um, analyze what your life looks like and try and find out what aspects of your own life can match to what you want to express or what you want to play. Like, let me think of an example. If you are a very extrovert person, um, you should watch out that when you play a certain kind of music, you must restrain your character. But when you're playing a fugue by Bach, you must restrain your character. But when you're playing a different kind of music, then you can take advantage of your extrovert character and make the most of it.
Right. So the best way is probably just to at least understand the music before going further with what you do with it.
Yes.
All right. Thank you. So yeah, I think we can say that we've answered that. Okay, we have another question from Professor Shorox, apparently.
Oh, I'm
So
glad to know that he's online.
yeah, I think maybe he's on YouTube with us. So yeah, he's asking, what kind of varnish do you use for your boat?
um, Definitely not this. It's rosin. The thing we use for our bows. So
All right. So yeah, I think with that we've pretty much come to the end of tonight's program. So yeah, thank you so much for your responses, Marcello.
it's been a great opportunity, and well, I must also thank Professor Shorox, who just wrote a few lines, because it was him suggesting me that I could like to answer to this interview of yours. So I'm very glad to have this opportunity to say hi to him and thank him.
Well, many thanks to the both of you for that then. So sorry everyone, but we are coming up to the end of tonight's broadcast. So we'd just like to remind everyone that our JPO family program will be broadcasted twice a week until further notice. So join us next time with our next guest, who will be announced at a later date. So more details on this can be found on our Facebook page. A video recording of tonight's broadcast will also be available on the JPO YouTube channel, along with the past webinars and the soon to be broadcasted interviews. So feel free to either share the Zoom webinar registration link, the JPO YouTube channel, or even the JPO Facebook page with your friends and family. So for our YouTube audience, if you are enjoying our program, please show your support by pressing the like and subscribe button down below. So you guys have been an amazing audience. And yeah, we from the JPO family wishes that everyone stays safe and healthy as we continue to face the crisis together. So I will now be leading a prayer to end tonight's program. So please pray in whatever faith you believe in regarding the COVID-19 pandemic. We pray that everyone in the world continues to stay strong in surviving through these difficult times, and that a solution to the virus will soon be found. We pray that governments across the world continue to improve upon their efforts and decision making so as to protect their people and prevent the spread of the virus. We pray for the safety and well-being of everyone working as we enter a new month of November, and as we continue to face new surges of cases here in Malaysia. We pray for the continued safety and morale of the frontliners who are risking their lives so that they may continue to provide for those in need, as well as the safety of everyone else across the world. So, yeah, with that, once again, do you have anything to add to this, Professor Marcello?
Yes, I want to say goodbye to everyone, and I want to join this prayer by adding that we pray so that we can understand nature and try to be more a part of it, because I think part of this crisis is due to the fact that we think we are superior to nature, and we are just a part of creation, and we should always stay aware of this.
Yeah, definitely there. Definitely can agree on that there. So yeah, once again, thank you, Marcello, for joining us. So
Thank you.
good. Thank you. Well, good night, and we hope to see you all again next time.